I said, listen, cunt, occasionally the little bloke likes to punch on. What's the fucking issue here? I didn't say that. That would have been a bad start to my relationship with this teacher.
Is he bullying kids? Is he calling them rangas and punching them and calling them homos and whatnot?
No, I think that's phase 2. At the moment, it's just minor disagreements of the best toys in the classroom. And I'm putting my hand up and accepting responsibility. I think over the movies had a little bit too much screen time, and it's made him a little antisocial and maybe not good at sharing. And so, but anyway, it was definitely an illuminating. I had to try and figure out what's the accurate. You have situations and you almost have an out-of-body experience. Like, what's the accurate way my face should be looking right now as I'm receiving this news?
How did you break it down to your son afterwards?
Because by that point he'd already started to process what he'd done wrong and realized there were going to be ramifications. So because he was already there, I wasn't angry or didn't feel the need to kind of drag it out or anything like that. But I just, the standard shit. We all have feelings. You just need to find better ways of expressing your feelings. And so I trotted out all those, like a politician, all the standard parental lines. But no, it's all good. It was just definitely, I wanted to kind of chuckle when she was telling me the news, because if it was like a repeat thing, your kid was always getting into trouble, at a certain point you'd become pissed off or just frustrated by it. But because it's the first time, you're like, oh, I knew this day would come, and it's finally here. So at some point. So anyway,
I remember, I vividly remember this. I got in a fight my very first day of preschool. So I must have been 4. And I just show up to the sandbox. I see this kid playing. I'm like, hey, he looks all right. I'll go play with him. And I guess another kid didn't like that I was playing with this friend, and he just jumped on me and started swinging. And I fought back. Teachers broke it up, and we went to class. Like, that was the end of it. Like, no one ever talked about it again. I don't even remember if I spoke to either of those kids again. But that was my very first day of preschool.
It's like on the first day in prison, you got to prove yourself and kind of show that you're not a punk. That's exactly what you did.
So. And I don't know if I proved I was or wasn't a punk, because I took the first punch, but I also hit back, so I don't know what that proved.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it's just bizarre to try and get now you have the kind of trying to remember what it's like to be a kid and going to school and all that shit. And anyway, I definitely think I did okay playing the role of the concerned parent, and I definitely felt like that, but I was like, I'm not sure if my face is aligning with how I'm feeling right now. But anyway, that was the most recent interesting event in my last 24 hours for sure.
Well, shit that little kids do is inherently funny when it really shouldn't be. There's one thing that I can't really explain it, but kids here, because I work at an elementary school here, they do this thing where they put their hands in like the prayer position and they run up behind their friends, but also sometimes other teachers, and they just ram it as hard as they can up the other person's ass.
I think I've heard about this. Yeah, because my missus visited Japan a while ago, and that's been going on for a while, right?
Yeah, and that's just accepted here. And they will try to get you. Kids who don't even know who you are, you're not even their teacher. If you turn your back to them, like you're done for. And if I was talking about this like anywhere else, well, even here, like obviously it's not something I condone, but like the entire idea is pretty fucking funny too, that this is like a thing here.
It's their version of the wedgie type of thing.
And it's so much.
It's more invasive.
Yeah, it's more invasive, more personal.
Yeah, I guess so. All right, this week's topic: Steve Rannazzisi, the comedian who lied about 9/11. I don't recall before we jump into Steve Rannazzisi, I don't recall whether we've told our respective 9/11 stories, but where were you when 9/11 happened? And don't fucking lie about it.
God damn it. All right. So I can't lie about it. So I was 11. I was a child in elementary school. And it happened early morning on the East Coast. So it was even earlier West Coast time. And there's no risk of her listening to this, so I could say what I want. My sister gets emotional over everything. She still does. And she was only a couple years older than me, so she was a kid at this time. And I just remember her like bursting into my room at like 6 in the morning, crying. I'm like, the fuck? I'm trying to wake up and figure out what's happening. And she's going, "We're at war." And I'm saying, "What?" She goes, "We're at war. We're being attacked." And I'm saying, "What the hell are you talking about?" And I go downstairs and turn on the TV. And at this point, only the first tower had been hit. And as I was watching TV, like just trying to process this, because I'm a little kid, like I'm aware of violence and death and history and war as an abstract concept, but I'd never really seen anything like happen live with live TV coverage. And the second tower got hit a couple minutes after I'd woken up. And I remember I went to school and all the classes just had that on the TV. There's basically no lesson, and the teachers were just glued to the TV. I remember like thinking it was scary, but I don't think I really understood the consequences of it and the way it would pretty much just shape the next 2 decades. How everything was kind of a direct result of that day and American foreign policy, these endless wars we've gotten involved in. Oh man, yeah, it's one of those things where I'm trying to disconnect what I know about it now and just my initial thoughts as a kid. As a kid, I was like, what? People hate Americans? I thought we were the good guys. I thought everyone loved America because that's, what school tells you. You're not really told otherwise. So the idea that there's people out there who would want to do that, my little kid mind had trouble accepting it.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, it happened in the middle of the night on the west coast of Australia, and my dad was still watching the TV. I think it was probably like the last thing that he saw. He was about to go to bed, and it came on the news bulletin or like every channel, I believe. And he tried to wake me up, but I was, young teenager, like needed my sleep. So apparently I just, grunted something and didn't get up and went back to sleep. And so similar thing the next morning, it was on the news everywhere. And at school, it was the only thing everyone was talking about. And I remember a couple of things. That there was just this implied assumption that America was now at war with someone, which at the time it just felt so obvious. But it turned out to be true in a sense. But I think back and just if a similar attack had happened on another landmark in another country, you wouldn't necessarily leap to the conclusion of now it's war. You'd be
Right.
like, as someone has been and a landmark has been attacked, people have died. Let's find out who's responsible for it. Whereas with America, it's like you've pissed off the bully. Someone's got to pay. We don't know who we're at war with yet, but let's make it official. We're at war. No if, buts, or maybes.
Well, and also when you consider that like the late 90s were full of disaster movies of American landmarks getting destroyed. Like the fact that
Deep
it
Impact,
wasn't just, yeah,
Armageddon, yeah.
and instead it wasn't just a population center. It was like a quote unquote symbol of the US, at that time our tallest buildings in our biggest city. And it's theatrical. Like the attack wasn't just an attack, it was a theatrical statement at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. And the World Trade Center had been attacked before, which I wasn't aware of until years later in the early 90s. And I actually heard on a podcast the other day, someone said there's a really chilling interview with one of the perpetrators of the bombing in the early 90s of the World Trade Center. And there's like a big New York cop who has him bundled up in a cop car or something. And the guy was like, how do you feel you didn't get it? And the terrorist was like, oh, we'll get it. just like really cold and chilling. And sure enough, what was it, a decade later or less than, they got it. So yeah, I remember just this implied assumption that America was at war, and as a major ally, Australia would be somewhat involved as well as the fucking little brother. How can we help out? And then there was also, I remember, a very strange kind of desire that me and my friends were harboring, where we were at that point, immediately after it happened, there was an undetermined amount of dead people, and we wanted the number to be as high as possible. Like there's that story that George Carlin was going to drop a special, I believe, on 9/11. It's called, and the title was "I Kind of Like It When a Lot of People Die," and he obviously didn't release it, but it was eerie. The kind of the Carlin-esque takeaway was that whenever he hears about some type of disaster or cataclysmic event, he wants, the higher the better, just kind of the self-hatred of being part of the human race. And I don't think I had that. He was obviously at a different phase of his life, but for me and my friends, I think it was something to do with burgeoning puberty and hormones pulsing through our veins, where we were like, how old was I, 13 or 14? And just kind of maybe being subconsciously aware that we are about to become men, but we're not going to be treated as men for maybe until we're 20 or something, and just that frustration and kind of like the testosterone that doesn't have anywhere to go. So we secretly wanted a lot of people to die and a lot of carnage and a lot of repercussions. Like, we were ready to go. If it was going to be a war, we were going to be involved in some capacity, which, looking back, was just is incredibly immature and misguided. But at the time, it was just like, yeah, bring it on. The world, our existing world, the pre 9/11 paradigm for a teenage boy seemed kind of boring. We were just going to be plodding through, but then that event kind of changed things and made every moment more loaded. Did you feel any similar thing where it was like, oh, this shit got real?
Again, because I was 11 and my childhood was just so shaped by movies, blockbuster movies, like the ones we already mentioned, action movies, war movies. And I remember after it happened, after getting over the initial shock, I was thinking, okay, when are we going to get revenge? And specifically thinking revenge. I didn't even know who these guys were. I didn't know what that part of the world was. But I kept thinking, okay, like, we need to get revenge. Why hasn't it happened yet? Why aren't we bombing the shit out of them? And I remember when they turned on the news at school, when they first sent forces into Afghanistan, and showing like the precision missiles and caves being blown out. I was like, I might have actually like been cheering. I'm not sure. And I'm not sure what the reaction in the class was. And that just, I don't know, kind of paints a gross picture of American jingoism. But that's how I felt. And as I got older, when the wars in both Iraq at this point and Afghanistan were still going on, I remember thinking, like, once I turned 18, I wonder if they're going to reinstate the draft because, they haven't really had that since Vietnam. It's all by conscription. And a part of me, because I was dumb and a teenager, even considered signing up. I was like, well, fuck it. What else do I have to do? So glad I didn't, obviously. I mean, war is fucking stupid. You don't need an idiot like me to tell anyone that.
Yeah, but yeah, I think it's perfectly it's the age you're at. I think, it's an inevitable type of feeling, and then maybe the nonstop coverage and the very iconic images of the event itself. It's kind of like a myth-making wet dream to kind of implant bullshit in people's brains. So yeah, I came out by the time I was like 17, 18, where if there was a draft, I assume I would have been around the mark of being eligible. I'd completely gone out the other gone through the other direction. Like, yeah, I'm not fighting for someone else, and like I've got girls to chase and drugs to take, university. So yeah, but all right. So that in years to come, people will comb through both of those testimonies and figure out where we've lied there with our respective stories. So we'll revisit those stories in a few years.
They're gonna be like, David, your class didn't have a television in it, you piece of shit.
Yeah, cancelled. CoinciDATE banned on Amazon.
Banned. For that reason.
Yeah. All right. So Steve Rannazzisi, to give you an overview, he moved to Los Angeles. He grew up in New York. He was based in New York while 9/11 happened, and his girlfriend at the time, I believe wife, was working in the towers when it happened. I'm not sure if it was the first or second plane. She was evacuated and she was fine. They moved over to Los Angeles. He wanted to become a stand-up. He was hanging out at the Comedy Store one day, and the way he tells it on Howard Stern when the truth finally came out was that he was sitting at the Comedy Store with a bunch of other comedians, and they were saying, "Oh, you've just come from New York." He said, "Yes." They said, "Oh, you were there during 9/11?" He's like, "Yep." And then the next question was like, "So you're in the towers, right?" And he said, "Yes." And he just went with it. And he said that there was like a 15-second window where he had the opportunity to say, "Hey, sorry, my bad, guys. That came out wrong. I wasn't actually in the towers. I was in the city, but I was uptown," or, to tell the truth. But he said that moment passed him by, and then it just became his identity and a part of his story. And I think that became gospel for about 10 years, and it undoubtedly helped his career. It's very difficult to ascertain, to measure like what was the positive impact of him telling that story. It's impossible to figure that out, but you kind of just know how these things happen. People, you even if you're not a part of the you're not a fireman or someone, you're kind of like a hero. You're on the front line, and so he undoubtedly, even just getting introduced to people, it's like a great hook to be like, "Oh yeah, I survived 9/11." So yeah, it definitely seemed to help him ingratiate himself with the comedy community in Los Angeles. He said that obviously his wife found out that he was using her story because he was telling it on podcasts and stuff like that. And so he said that they just came to an agreement that he could use her story. And they just, I think his plan was to hope it goes away, because it kind of got his foot in the door. He said it wasn't a calculated thing. It just slipped out, as I explained. But then once it was out there, he was just like, okay, let's stop talking about it. Let's move on. And it worked. He started becoming a famous stand-up. He got on a TV show, The League. As I said, he recounted the story when he was on big podcasts such as Mark Maron's back in the day. And then eventually, I think it was some investigative reporter it was a family member or a friend tipped off a reporter who kind of exposed him. And so then he had to go on like an apology tour and say, "Yeah, my bad."
Yeah, imagine like your cousin be like, "Yeah, this cunt wasn't in 9/11," or like he wasn't.
Yeah. He spurns you at Thanksgiving. He didn't pass the cranberry sauce quick enough, so you're like, "Fuck you, motherfucker! You're going down. You're going down like the towers, bitch." Yeah. So, and yeah, that was kind of, he was publicly shamed, and I think to this day, well, for the rest of his life, how do you live that down? Like, unless another major bad event happens and he says he survives that one as well. Yeah, that's forever what he's going to be known for. So for me, I'm drawn to this story because, firstly, I don't believe there's been a good 9/11 movie. There's been some attempts. I don't think I've ever seen. I've seen a few trailers. I think there's a really bad Nick Cage one, where I'm sure Nick Cage is the fucking boss in it, but the movie itself looks like a piece of shit.
Right.
and I think Oliver Stone tried to do one, and yeah, there hasn't been a good 9/11 movie, and yeah, I think this one, I've thought about this story for ages because I remember listening to the podcast when it was his story, like when it was still gospel, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like it was just a part of this guy's character, kind of like Pete Davidson's dad died in 9/11. You're just like, oh, that's a part of his story.
Being a first responder there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it just becomes a part of your Wikipedia in your own mind of the history of the world. And so when the story broke, I was like, oh, what a piece of shit, because I felt kind of personally conned. Because I'd listened to those original podcasts at the time. So there's that. But I think the thing that spurred got me interested once again was the recent Alex Jones case of how he's getting sued by Sandy Hook families, where he has called them crisis actors over the last decade or so since that tragedy, and they're suing him. And because he's essentially a grifter, and I think he's a way more egregious, calculated, evil grifter. But in a sense, it's a similar type of story where you fabricate something to further your career. So you're hijacking a major event to get some personal gain. So that there's that element, but then also there's the concept of public shaming, which is we all lie. We all tell white lies. We all tell slight mistruths. And then with something like this, people use their rage that they have towards the terrorists that commit it, and they can't go after those terrorists, but they can go after this guy. So your really dumb and kind of selfish decision to lie about your involvement in 9/11, you can become a scapegoat, and your act almost becomes worse than the original act, which is totally not true, but you can definitely understand how some people, especially those that were directly connected to 9/11, could get there emotionally and scapegoat Renazizi. So that's kind of why I think this would be really interesting fodder for a feature or a TV show. What are your kind of impressions of the story, Davey?
There's so much to unpack here. Because on the one hand, it's a really stupid thing to lie about, but it doesn't really hurt anyone other than his career. It's one of those things where like, well, that's a dumb fucking lie, especially because it's so easy to disprove. Like apparently the company he said he worked for, we never had an office in the World Trade Center, and like, it's like, well, that right there, like you didn't even get your story straight. At least get the facts straight, which I guess kind of makes sense in his explanation / apology that he was kind of just like roped into it. But that also seemed like him kind of deflecting blame somewhat. He's like, they kept asking me questions, and I was just so caught up in the momentum of the conversation, I only had those 15 seconds to decide like what to say. Like, well,
yeah, no, I felt the same way about that, but because he might not have been calculated. He wasn't like, I'll move to LA with this story and outlined it on the plane over there and then like fine tuned it and then rolled it out at the Comedy Store. But in that moment where they, in his words, kind of put it on him and said, you were in the towers, right? And he said, yes. In that moment, that's when the kind of like path to fame or his could have been illuminated in his mind, where he's like, oh fuck, if I just don't say anything now, they're going to think of me as the 9/11 guy, and I probably won't have to give too many more details about the story, and this would be a great hook for me. So even though it wasn't a prepared story, he could have been like cunning in that moment and just decided to run with it. So it just because it wasn't calculated doesn't get him off the hook of being kind of like a sneaky weasel.
I think of the lies I've told and like why I do it and what the consequences are. And again, unless someone pulls up evidence that shows otherwise, I've never told a lie of that scale. It's usually something along the lines of like writing on a profile that I'm 5'9" when really I'm 5'8". Like that's kind of the extent of my lie. You know what I mean?
It's par for the course, right? That's almost acceptable at this point.
Because there's situations where I easily could have pulled one of these guys' 9/11 stories, So, for example, I went to the university that famously was shot up by Elliot Rodger. Having said that, I had already graduated the year prior, but I had a job, a delivery job that took me on campus. So I was technically there when it happened, but I was not a part of it. I was not aware there was a shooting going on. I didn't find out until the next morning when I got home and like saw the news. Because, it's a big spot and I could very easily say like, yeah, man, I was there. I saw the shooting. Like I saw people getting shot. That didn't happen. Like I was essentially where he was during the September 11th attacks, i.e., not a part of it.
Yeah.
And, but it'd be so easy just to tell people like, yo, dude, I was there.
And how empty our existences must be so dull when just someone, even you being there, right? You obviously didn't die. You still get to the fact that you were there, that would make you more interesting or potentially more fuckable to the opposite sex. Just
Plus
purely
big 5'9", yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, don't forget that. 5'8", not gonna work. But just how bizarre is that we like latching on just to be like, oh, he was there. It's that like these sparks of activity or kind of tragedy. There's something that's outside the mundanity and kind of just bog standard everyday existence that we're like, oh, if you're in my life, even just for tonight, then I'm somehow attached to this event. It's like we are pretty I don't know. It's kind of like we're all fame whores, whether we realize it or not. That we want a bit of that rub that comes with huge events. Strange.
But it's always something like a tragedy. People, they want to somehow connect themselves to it. What his story reminds me of, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but like in high school or just early adult life, when someone that you knew from childhood or from school, they die, and people are posting on their social media like, I miss you so much, like it's not gonna be the same without you. And there's always that one guy that wasn't really friends with them, but he sees that like, oh, like this is the end thing, like maybe I could like get some of my own attention by being like, bro, like you're the best friend I ever had, like you're gonna miss you so much. And then people are like, what the fuck, they weren't friends.
Oh my god. Yeah, the wrong guy died in that instance. The piece of shit who's trying to gain sympathy. Yeah, it's I don't know. It's kind of depressing, but yeah. So anyway, I think that and what's interesting about this particular story is that apparently Steve Rannazzisi, this is kind of inside baseball because I've listened to a lot of comedians' podcasts who was like personally friends with Steve Rannazzisi, knew him when he was just like a newbie at the store, and then kind of worked up the ranks. And I think he was privately telling like his good comedian friends that it didn't happen and kind of laying the groundwork for a potential walk back on the story. So it seems like he'd started that process, but hadn't done anything publicly. And so and then he was exposed. So when someone else exposes it for you, you just it looks like you were trying to get away with it for the rest of your life. So that doesn't help. But by all accounts, like I think what's kind of strange is that like he was the 9/11 comedian, the survivor before, and he still is now. Like if anything, more people associate 9/11 with him now. So I was thinking about it in an abstract sense that like the lie really fucking works. Yeah. Because he was like, oh, maybe 9/11 will give me a boost, and now it'll last the rest of his life. So I don't know. There's kind of like a delicious little moral in the story that like be careful what you wish for, because in this instance he's got it for the rest of his fucking life.
See, both of our favorite movies, both of our favorite movie is Joker. Obviously, we've
Defos. Yeah.
And I was just thinking, this is a a more twisted, sick like tragedy than Joker. And it's funny, by wanting to be a part of a tragedy, he it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. He made his own and ruined his fucking life.
Yeah, definitely. Did you
But you
ever
know,
see this show that he was in, The League? Did you ever see that?
yeah, it was to me kind of like a third-rate It's Always Sunny.
Yeah, it seems
And I
like I've
believe
never actually seen it, but that was my guess of what it would be all about.
I believe too, it came on like immediately after Sunny, like as a back-to-back thing, and just very, very uh not even juvenile because I like juvenile humor, just like very lazy humor, and I'm not sure if he
Yeah.
was in the writing or just an actor on the show. But going back to his Stern interview, the one where I guess he essentially comes clean and Howard Stern asks him, "Well, why did you do it? How did it go down?" My impression was I don't think he was sorry that he lied. He looked like a deer in headlights. He looked sorry that he got caught. Like that I he never really gave like a genuine like remorseful answer. He was like pale and looked sickly and embarrassed, but it was out and he figured, well, like I have to acknowledge it. I can't not talk about it. But the way he tried to justify it where people were just asking me questions and like one thing led to another. I had that 15-second window. What it reminded me of when I was in high school, there was this white guy who got caught saying the N-word by a bunch of black people. And they filmed him. They filmed like their encounter. Like, we know what you said. And he was getting so red. He's like, I didn't say it. I swear, I swear. Like, bro, we know you said it. Just admit it. And the funniest thing is like this kid tries to paint himself as like this white knight, really woke dude. And even more so now, he's constantly posting like Black Lives Matter stuff. But he got caught red-handed, and instead of apologize, he was just like talking in circles about what an ally he is and how he supports black people and he has black friends. It's like, dude, just admit it. You're on camera. Like,
Mm.
there's no way you're gonna crawl yourself out of this pit regardless. So you might as well just like let the truth have its day.
Yeah. I felt as well that he was in that interview, he was coming clean because like someone else had exposed him, but he was trying to give himself the best kind of vantage, like to kind of say that, well, this is why I did it, to try and plant in your head about, if you're in my situation, you could see yourself doing something similar, right? Like he was being kind of slightly something salesman-y about it, where he was selling you on the idea of why he did it and why it was not okay, but understandable to do that. And to give him the benefit of the doubt, when someone gets publicly shamed, there was that book by John Ronson a few years ago where he was on a bunch of podcasts talking about it. I think it's called So You've Been Publicly Shamed. And I just heard him on so many podcasts talking about the book. I didn't feel the need to read the book because I just kind of got the gist. It was
Sure.
An investigative journalist, but he spoke about that case. I think her name was Justine Sacco, where she made that joke when she was on the plane from London she was going to Africa, and she'd taken a couple valleys and had some glasses of wine, and she said, "I'm going to Africa. I hope I don't get AIDS. Ha, of course not. I'm not black." And then tweet sent, and then like out of the plane takes off, and then she wakes up and her life had been ruined. So I think his main takeaway there was that the punishment didn't fit the crime. Sure, that was a dumb tweet, insensitive, racist, blah blah blah, but she got death threats, and just kind of had to essentially start again her whole life and severe psychological trauma. And one of his takeaways was that, like, in the social media era, that kind of no apology is good enough anymore.
Right.
So no matter what you say, no matter how you, some people say don't apologize at all, and you get shit on. And then if you apologize, if you completely roll over, you get shit on. It's kind of like, yeah, you are a piece of shit.
You're the dancing monkey.
Yeah, exactly. And then if you do something kind of in the middle, which I feel like Renazizi did, he goes, I did it, but here's why, and I knew it was wrong, and it ate me up inside. And it's like, then you're kind of like, you're still being a sneaky weasel, aren't you? Like, so in his defense, I feel like when you've done something heinous, it's always going to be an uncomfortable situation. And just by him having to revisit it, we kind of have to revisit. You have to kind of go along for the ride and just be like, dude, that was disgraceful. Like, why did that have to happen? So I try and think that, that there's no way where you can watch something like that and be like, oh, that was awesome. Feel good. Like, I feel good about it now. Because the original act is just so heinous. You never get the apology video for something like that is never going to make you feel okay about the first thing that happened.
See, that's why I think more so than the apology is just acknowledging the mistake, like being honest about it. And whether people allow you to move on, that's up to them. But like, don't try to do a Weasley apology, and don't apologize unless you actually mean it. Like, if you don't give a fuck, stick to your guns, even if you're dead wrong. I'm trying to think of anyone in a similar case who's come out okay.
Well, and this kind of ties into what I was thinking with the movie, but yeah. Louis C.K. is someone. Yeah, Louis C.K. is someone who a similar thing. Rumors were swirling for years. It finally came out, and people shit on his apology. I remember because. Do you remember his apology? He kind of did it in a very typical Louis fashion. I'm a part of Louis C.K.'s email list, and the way he writes notes to his fans is really funny. It's just kind of like receiving disjointed emails from like a stoner friend where he's like, right. Yeah, I just really short sentences. It was like, over the years, I've done some fucked up things. I've taken out my dick in front of women. I've played with my dick in front of women. I always asked women if it was okay to play with my dick before I took out my dick, and like a lot. So he the day after it broke, he came out and he apologized, and people were shitting on him for apologizing. And from kind of like the feminist sphere was like, in his apology, he made reference to his dick 7 times, and that was an instance of just being like, you can't win even if you come out and try and apologize, but he's still got a career. He can still sell out shows. He kind of is edging his way back into mainstream showbiz. He won a Grammy, I think, last year for his stand-up special.
And
which
people lost their mind about that. They're like, oh my God, they're giving a Grammy. Granted, you look at any Grammy Award winner, whether it's a rock star, a pop artist, a rapper, like going back to the 60s with Led Zeppelin, one of the best bands of all time. Like Jimmy Page was in a relationship with a 14-year-old girl.
Yeah, well, that's one where it's like, how the fuck has he survived that? Like, when are they going to go after him for that?
Or like on his deathbed, they're going to wait until he's like very sickly and then go after him. But it's one of those things where it doesn't justify it, but you kind of have to do that everything or nothing approach. If you're going to get mad at this, like, you have to like go to every single individual who's ever won something then.
Well, yeah, in terms of the reason I bring up Louis C.K., so I'll just give you kind of the main beats of what I was thinking, the way I'd put this movie together, the 9/11 movie that needs to happen. So I guess probably I'd stick with his version of facts, whereas his wife was kind of involved in the event. She tells him the story, and I'd use it as kind of like her survival as kind of like a very invigorating, positive. Her survival gives him like a lust for life, where it was like, fuck, she narrowly could have died. What are we doing in New York? We both want to be in LA. Let's fucking do it. So he uses that kind of like as motivation to get himself to LA and like start giving comedy a proper crack. And then he starts having dreams about the event. So like her testimony about what happened to her, he starts picturing himself in her shoes in the dream. And it's kind of like exactly as she tells it in his first dream. Goes to the Comedy Store, it slips out, and his career takes off, and he tells the story. He starts telling the story on the podcast. And so I think it would be cool to kind of like have a younger actor play Steve Rannazzisi of like in his late 20s or 30s, early 30s, however old he was at the time. But then you could actually take snippets of the actual podcasts and then use them as the audio and like montage scenes of like to show what he was saying on podcasts at the time, to get that actual kind of like the words out of his mouth, the lies direct from his mouth. And kind of show that like how each time he maybe changes the story a little bit, like the dream sequence of like it's not bulletproof. Like his memory is warping, or like his story rather is warping. But then what I think would be cool is to have like Steve Rannazzisi in the present to play the reporter who figures out there's something not right.
If he had the balls. I mean, he had the balls to lie about this, so I think he does. Because
there's actually so anyway, I'll finish what I'm saying. Yeah. So he plays the reporter who kind of cracks the code. The story breaks, and then he has like this public shaming. And then what I think would be cool to have Louis C.K. to play someone who actually lost his wife in 9/11, and so. You know, he hears about this story of this comedian lying and becomes enraged and develops a plot where he's like, I'm going to fucking kill that guy. So he, after the Stern interview or something, Louis C.K. kidnaps Steve Rannazzisi. And so then like maybe that's the last third of the movie is just Louis C.K. Explaining what it's like to hear a lie like that, and how much it hurt him, like an actual kind of like a Sandy Hook family member getting the opportunity to talk to Alex Jones like, this is what your lies do, so I'm gonna fucking kill you. But then the Steve Rannazzisi playing the journalist works with a cop played by Pete Davidson to be like a young detective to try and figure out where the fuck is Steve Rannazzisi? And then I don't know how you'd end it. Maybe he dies or whatever. But I think kind of having that meta level of people, Pete Davidson involved in 9/11, Louis C.K. who's been shamed, and like Steve Rannazzisi, I feel like this would kind of be the perfect apology where if he could portray the journalist to be like needling him on, like, why would you do this? And like, this is something insane. Or maybe you could even get Steve Rannazzisi to play the guy who lost the wife, actually lost the wife in 9/11. I feel like
if that movie came out after the movie, someone might actually kidnap Steve Rannazzisi. Son of a bitch. Like, it's gone full circle. Like, after all this, you're making money off of this, you bastard. And then they can make another movie about that.
Oh, yeah, totally. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking, what if someone actually hears this and makes this movie? It's like, well, you better give us royalties.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, there'd have to be hardcore disclaimers like a ton of the profits are going to the, firefighters who got their lungs fucked up because they went in on the day. But yeah, anyway, that was kind of what I was thinking. And there's actually a funny part of the Louis C.K. show where Dane Cook cameos on the show, and
I remember that one.
Yeah, and because Dane Cook stole one of Louis' bits, and apparently Dane Cook tells the story where Louis was like, "Oh, I want you to come on my show so we can kind of sort this out." And apparently Louis C.K. did this like real power move where he was like, "All right, you're going to be playing a character called Kane Duke. And in this show, you're accused of stealing one of my bits. I'm going to play Louis C.K." And he goes, "So your character is Kane Duke." And he's like, "Oh, Louis, like, I really want to do this. This is going to be a great way to figure out a problem. But yeah, can I just play myself? And Louis C.K. was apparently like, no, you're Kane Duke. You're Kane Duke. And so they sorted it out, and eventually Louis relented. But anyway, I think this would be a pretty obviously the whole story could talk about the issues we mentioned before in respect to kind of like public shaming and 9/11 as a whole, like just the way 9/11, anyone associated with it was treated as kind of like a blue blood or something, as someone very important and special, and the coattails that he was able to ride on because of that. But yeah, then actually having these disgraced comedians involved or people related to 9/11 would be kind of like an interesting meta way to kind of give them the opportunity to illustrate they understand the pushback that's coming at them, because you could allow them to deliver those lines and those sentiments directly.
And like we mentioned earlier, people never really accept apologies, and this movie doesn't sound like an apology, but it's like, look, we have all these people who like are directly involved. Let this be the end of the story. Let poor Steve move on with his life. Let him, you don't have to like him, but let that be the end of this part of his life. And I was thinking, just to round out the cast, for when Steve comes to California, maybe the comedy club owner at the first club he goes to should somehow be a part of the Bin Laden family. Give him a nice little cameo.
Yes, definitely. My friend, welcome. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, that was pretty much my kind of hastily thrown together story here, and I was trying to rack my brain about filmmakers that would maybe have the right approach here, and the one that I kind of thought about who would maybe do a good job, and it's a slight departure from what he's done, would be the British guy Edgar Wright, where the guy who did because I thought, to be honest, I watched Shaun of the Dead and the one where they play the two cops in the village, and yeah, that's it. And yeah, so I like those ones, but I've checked out on what he's done for the last 10 years. I didn't see Baby Driver or whatever, but I thought maybe he's kind of like really fast, like he's good at comedy. And I think this would maybe be interesting to see him kind of like see if he can add in, because yeah, with the end, with the kind of the kidnapping final kind of third of the movie, and then kind of some action scenes, and then kind of like the actual 9/11 sequences as well. I'm sure that Edgar Wright would be pretty good to do all the kind of action stuff. But then, yeah, it would be interesting to see how a filmmaker would do kind of more emotional, the whole kind of concept of trying to conceal a lie, and then what that would do to someone emotionally when it gets exposed as well. So yeah, he was just kind of my random thought where I'd like to, when a filmmaker, they are allowed to kind of flex their muscles a little bit, and you're like, oh, this is out. But I guess the perfect example being Joker with old mate Todd, where right. it was like, well, this is a departure from what you did, and I guess for what that movie was, it was he did well, made a bunch of money, but yeah, so I'd be thinking Edgar Wright for this type of.
And I think Edgar Wright is one of like the most talented filmmakers going now. I don't love his past like two non-Cornetto trilogy movies, but they're well made. I don't care for what the movies are. But you even watched Shaun of the Dead, for as absurd and violent and hilarious as it is. It does have a heart though, like the scene where he's talking to his mom right before he has to blow her brains out. It's genuinely heartbreaking. And it's like, oh, it's sad, but then there's like a punchline at the end. Like, no, the movie just allows it to be heartbreaking. And that movie balances tones so well. And he's got such a unique filmmaking style. So I think he needs a movie like this to prove he's not a one-trick pony, but to prove that the Shaun of the Dead type movies isn't all he's good for, that he can like go above and beyond and have his Joker, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. But Anyway, yeah, that's kind of my Steve Rannazzisi, and just as you mentioned, the concept, even just the idea of him like. Imagine him trying to pitch this to studios. Just the look on people's faces would be like, "What the fuck?"
So you play an
yeah.
actual 9/11 survivor in the movie who's pissed at Steve Rannazzisi.
Yeah, we're gonna get all these disgraced comedians. We get Louis C.K. We're getting we'll get Chris D'Elia involved. We'll get the whole cast of disgraced people.
I would want to watch the DVD commentary of this movie. Also, why don't we pitch it now? Because I know they're going to make more Batman movies. Steve Rannazzisi for Joker. For whenever they read, just paint his face green, let him be the Joker.
Yeah, and every like plot in the movie is to like blow up some type of towers. He's like, the Joker, Batman's not even in the towers. I don't care. I'm gonna blow him up again.
Or he just lies about it and like, you never blew it up. He's like, yes, I did.
Yeah, I wonder, just if something like this, because Steve Rannazzisi is like let's say like a B, between a C and a B grade celebrity. I'm sure if he's walking around major city, if he's walking around Chicago, if he's out in public all day, I reckon maybe like 4 or 5 people would recognize him, would be my guess. Just due to it's almost like a blessing now if you're a disgraced celebrity that everyone has their face in their phone. So even if you did recognize him like 10 years ago, you'd have way more eyes on you now. Right. Now everyone's got an incredible data plan, but like, so now like when you wake up in the morning, you're like, okay, I'm doing a show later tonight in Chicago. Is it even still, is it a consideration that you want to go out in public because you're like, oh, a few people might notice me, and some people might just say my name, and it will be undetermined whether they feel positive or negative towards me. But there'll be some people who kind of know what I did, and just like, do you develop scar tissue over time where you're like, no, I can deal with this, or each time someone brings it up, you're like, oh, that's another. You have to brace for it. It's more shit you have to deal with.
I don't know. People don't forget. Like, I was just thinking, I don't have a concrete example of this, but imagine you're working in an office, you're in your mid-20s, and one of your colleagues, a completely decent guy, he just has a very unfortunate day and he shits his pants during a meeting. Would you ever do that?
No, you'd never forget it, but I'm pretty good at like, you don't hold it against people, and
sure.
Trying to find a way, because if there's an elephant in the room, you kind of need to acknowledge the elephant. Like it's worse when you pretend the elephant isn't there. So like when you've done something shameful yourself, then you want people to kind of bring it up. Like, I remember at my brother-in-law's wedding, this was beginning of last year, I think it was, I drank way too many beers and they didn't have enough food. And I remember I was just sitting on a couch when like the dance floor was kicking off, and I just like leaned over and threw up on the floor in front of me. And, just way too late to try and get to a bathroom. I was like paralytic, and my missus had to come over and, help me out. And like, it wasn't a massive public scene because it was a big wedding. But people saw like, oh wow, he's fucked up. And then I just went to my hotel room and crashed. And then the next morning, there were some people who kind of like acknowledged it, and then there were other people who pretended it didn't happen. And you want some level of acknowledgement to be like, yeah, that was crazy. I had way too much to drink, versus just like, let's pretend the elephant isn't there.
Like, even if it's something as simple as them just asking, are you all right? So they're not pretending it didn't happen. Yeah. They're acknowledging it, but not in a confrontational way.
Yeah. And I think that, of course, if someone shits their pants at work, I can live down a public vomit, because that's not that rare. It's like
Right.
a public shitting in the office. That's a rare Pokemon. You can't. That's again. It's almost a selfish thing because you're like, I now have a story of I saw someone or I saw the aftermath of someone shitting them. It becomes about you. It's like, yes, I've got another. This is gonna go down really well at the next dinner party I'm at.
Right.
I'm just gonna.
It would be so easy though. Like, let's imagine you were in the office kitchen and you weren't there when he shit his pants. I feel like 10 out of 10 people, when they're retelling that story, are going to place themselves actually in the office when it happened.
Yeah. Yeah,
Because if they're
definitely.
not, then why tell the story? If you weren't even in the room, why tell it? Because the story begins and ends with, oh yeah, dude shit his pants.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wild to think back to how many stories that you've heard in your life and you've taken as gospel could be pure fabrications or like not pure fabrications, but the truth has been twisted in a sense. Yeah, where maybe they were in the room across the room when the guy shit himself, but they in the story they're right there. And so then yeah, then you're telling the story as this guy was right there. And so yeah, it's all a mishmash of bullshit. Our collective. That's why I think there's the concept of history itself is bizarre, and the whole even people say that the victors decide history, and it's like the victors. There's confetti everywhere. You can't just get a clear picture of what just happened because you're too busy celebrating. So I think that's kind of a beautiful mystery of that we don't really know what's happened, and therefore I kind of don't like people who kind of bring or who take history as like, oh, we got to learn from history, otherwise we're determined to, we're destined to make the same mistakes. It's like, dude, we don't even know what really happened.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much we don't know. I don't want to get too far off topic, but I read this really interesting science fiction short story, and it's about developed this technology that just replicates universes with different scenarios. But one of the side effects is they find out like, oh, it replicates every possible scenario, and they found one that is our history. Like, so we could go back at any time and like see what actually happened, and they find a lot of disappointment. Like, go like to this event, like, oh, that guy was never there. Like, go to when Marco Polo made contact with the Mongols. Like, there was no Marco Polo. Like, that was just a fabrication that these like spice sellers told. And then it's like, go back to Jesus. It's like, oh, are you sure? Like, I don't think you're gonna like what you see.
Yeah, no, it's fucking true. But if you let's say something horrendous comes out about yeah, that's even a strange thing is just that like the guilt by association people have where if someone gets canceled, whether to like on because everything's a network now online where if you're connected to someone, if you've done podcasts with someone and then something heinous comes out, then there's like this weird guilt by association thing where in the last 5 years and more celebrities have got canceled. Just observing how people have reacted around those people, they're kind of like acquaintances or friends, and like whether they choose to stick by them or like drop them completely or like put out, it's almost like sometimes people feel the need to put out a statement of like, oh, I had no idea what was going on. It's like that you've personally been accused of nothing apart from just knowing someone. But yeah, we just have this kind of like, there's this William Burroughs quote where it's something that like he's talking about the States and he's like, America is a nation of rats in terms of like the mob sense of a rat. Some people who are willing to kind of turn each other out for a dime. And now I feel like people are willing to turn one another out for clicks or likes or subscribes, and just the commenting on someone's cancellation, that there's almost like a calculated strategic reason for doing that so that you can get more, like I guess people could even argue that us picking this topic is because there are certain people interested in this story, or me picking this topic is I personally think that maybe subconsciously I did that, but I'm just drawn to this story. But yeah, it's all kind of murky in terms of like, how should you react when someone does something shady? Like where does the where should friendship begin? Have you ever thought about that? Like, if someone that you assumed was a really stand-up, nice guy, if something terrible happened, what, when should you cut someone off? When should you stick by them?
I think because I've had friends who like I've known since childhood, and there's a rumor that started about one, and I never bought it for a second. And other people like, oh, like you're gonna hang out with that guy's a dirtbag, and I always said, according to who? Like who's saying this? And then a couple of years it finally came out. I was like, yeah, that story it never happened. Like someone just made it up. It's like, see, I stood by my friend. I wasn't gonna like allow that to happen. But I have other friends who they're fun, but like it doesn't take long to know that they're kind of shady. You don't mind them because they buy you booze, they get you food, they're always willing to splash out money on you just to have a good time. But when it comes out, it's just like, oh yeah, he cheated on his pregnant girlfriend. It's like I have no like doubt about that. And like he did this, this, and this. And it's like, well, you know what? Like I have no problems cutting ties with this person. And it's not even like to save face. It's because okay, the writing is on the wall. They were never a particularly good person, and like let me just get out now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of a you're constantly getting intel about the people you hang around with, like, oh, that you observe them in certain situations, and you can kind of extrapolate to be like, oh, I see how you treated that waiter at the bar,
Exactly.
or like, and you're like, oh, that would probably mean that he treats other people in these situations like that. So, but yeah, I try and lean on the benefit of the doubt, because like I just think of like society at large, and the Alex Jones case is a good example where I feel like it's a perfect distillation of the importance and also ramifications of free speech, where it's like Alex Jones had the freedom to say what he liked about this event, and he decided to say certain things that caused irrevocable damage to the families. And so they were like, well, this is what's happened to us. We've had to like move homes and do all this shit because Alex Jones's words directly led his deranged supporters to treating us like shit. It was within their freedom to band together and mount a civil case, and it worked. They're going to get all this money from Alex Jones if he's got any left. And so for me,
that's the way of doing things the right way. I think they're in the right to do that.
Well, yeah, and I think it's just a perfect idea of like, that's free speech working, because Alex Jones was allowed to take a chance and say some crazy shit, and it didn't work out for him nor the other people, but at least the other people have been. So yeah, because like I just think about the way, the kind of cancellation stuff, or just the online vendettas, things happen, and but you go to the airport or something like that, and you're around all these people. It's like, I don't know who's been to jail. I don't know what religion these other people are. Like, we need to find that there has to be kind of like an acceptance of difference to just function, to just be like, all right, if you're a plumber, I don't really care what your political ideologies are. That there is it's definitely a murky area in terms of like what you're doing online anonymously and how you're trying to influence other people and all that shit. But just in terms of like day-to-day life, I think you can kind of like make observations about the way people are behaving. But yeah, I definitely just try and vote with my feet versus make clear distinctions of like, I didn't like the vibes of that person, therefore I'm going to publicly state I denounce them or something.
Yeah.
It's pretty bold to go ahead and do that, but
well, it reminds me of James Franco and Seth Rogen, who they were buddy, and Seth Rogen, this is all like conjecture, but I assume he like did not mind like getting James Franco's like runoffs and leftovers. He's like, hey, like I'm the funny comedian. He's like the handsome, good-looking actor. We're gonna party together, like meet a lot of women. I think there were stories for years about James Franco being a weirdo, especially with women much younger than him at college campuses and whatnot. And, he never said anything. It wasn't until it, it was so in your face that whatever production company Seth Rogen was involved in probably demanded him to make a statement, whether he meant it or not. And look, if he was truly James Franco's friend, he's like, hey, I'm going to stand by my friend. But, money wins in the end, I suppose. It matters more. And so he threw his friend under the bus.
Yeah, but even in that story, right, let's assume what you just explained happened, where Rogen's film production company said you need to publicly denounce Franco in order to get funding for this movie, or help sell tickets for your next movie, whatever it was. Maybe Rogen was like, fuck, I'm not working with Franco anymore, but I still don't want to do that. So he called James Franco and said, hey, buddy, this is the situation I'm in. And maybe James Franco was like, oh, dude, throw me under the bus. Like, if it's going to help you continue to do what you want to do, then I know that we're cool or whatever, or you don't really mean it, but it's just kind of a necessary political maneuver you have to play. But the public just sees Seth Rogen and throw him under the bus. Like, maybe Rogen was in a lose-lose situation where if he didn't say anything, he wasn't going to be able to make his next movie. And if he said something, which he did, then everyone's like, oh, you're not standing by your boy. Like a really charismatic guy where we assume we know and would like James Franco just because he's a really good actor. And it's kind of like the same with the whole Johnny Depp Amber Heard thing. Like, I didn't watch that. I wasn't obsessed with a lot of people, like a lot of people were, which, by the way, what a strange thing that you can just watch. That was on for like 3 weeks every day. Like, it's hilarious. They can kind of make content out of anything. And, but anyway, the general consensus there is that she's a crazy bitch. He got fucked over. The result was a just one. But then you read a bit more about it and you find out that Johnny Depp had a really slick social media team to create the memes, and that probably fed into how he was behaving on the stand to get these memeable moments or clips that are great for YouTube circulation. And she was not savvy or charismatic enough to do that. So he comes across as like a middle-aged guy who's been fucked over by this younger chick and now gets to like have a rebirth. Whereas I look at it and just think they're both clearly fucking crazy.
Fucked up, selfish actors, both of them.
Yes, who've been out of touch with reality since they were like in their early 20s. And so he's been famous for a long fucking time. So I just find it hilarious where the public narrative about these people we've never met becomes so simplified. And yeah, and the money stuff is complicates things. But final question: what if something crazy happened to you, and let's say you didn't even do it. Let's say that something got pinned on you. People assumed that you were just a monster. How do you reckon you would go as a recluse for the rest of your days?
Yeah, I mean, at a certain point, I would give up trying to convince them. I would never take the easy route either of just admitting it. If they're like, just admit it, it'll make life easier. It's like, no, I'm not going to admit it. I'll choose to be a recluse. Just find myself a little hut in the woods and live out my days there, which honestly doesn't sound all that bad. Like, it would suck just knowing something is pinned on you that you didn't do. It's frustrating. I mean, even going back to childhood where you get grounded for something your older sister did or for something your cousin did, and as a little kid you're the one who gets your PlayStation taken away. It fucking sucks. The kind of concepts, when people say that like solitary confinement is the worst punishment you can inflict on someone, it drives people insane. I've always found that interesting, and I'm assuming it must tie into our kind of
the evolutionary psychology of humans, where if you were cast out from the tribe, if you're alone for more than 3 days or something, that probably meant that you were lost in the wilderness. So your mind and body start sending alerts to be like, hey, you're fucked. If you don't find someone, you're not going to be able to make a fire in a day or so. And so nowadays we live these extremely independent, solitary existences. We're incentivized to create, to carve out a niche for ourselves in terms of our profession. So it's like nowadays, like if you want to make money and it's kind of like just make yourself different. So it's kind of like we're already putting ourselves in a sense of right. Solitary confinement, and how whether you'd still, you have these kind of like needs to socialize, but sometimes it just feels like you're ticking an evolutionary box. You've been like, all right, I left my apartment today and then went to the 7-Eleven and you bought a coffee from the guy and said hi and bye. And it's like your body's like, okay, yeah, so you're not cast off from the tribe. And then we go straight back to our little hovels and straight back on the laptop and, immerse in our own bullshit again. So when is the next evolutionary phase going to happen? And we're actually just going to accept that we're all in our own little solo private trips. Anyway.
Yeah, it's gonna be weird. I think about that too, how no one wants to admit it, but even people who are like physically in the same proximity with one another tell it to their faces, or I don't know, because I went to Starbucks earlier today just to get coffee after work, and looking at the tables next to me, whether it was friends or couples, I mean, I'm going to sound like the boomer, but they're all on their phone, like not talking to one another. So it's just, what's even the point? What's even the point of doing this together? You could all do this in your own little cubicle and just have coffee, and the result's really the same.
Yeah, Japan seems to be a kind of the most dystopian version of that at the moment. I saw a hilarious Japanese government ad the other day online where it was encouraging young people to drink more, to go out. And it's just like, and I'm assuming that's probably a tandem effort to boost hospitality revenue and the birth rate, get people drunk and slamming into each other. But yeah, you're the boots on the ground, wading through the dystopia. So
yeah, I'll update if there's anything to update.
Definitely. Well, thanks for your time. Another ep in the bag. And we'll be here same time next week.
See you next time.